It's time for Ask Mike Mondays. Mike answers one listener's question every week. Here's Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to Ask Mike Mondays. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today, Mr. Michael Becker.
Hey, Paul.
Michael, how are you?
Things are going pretty good. What's new in the Old Capital world?
October 24th, 25th. Make sure you make it down to the Old Capital Multifamily Conference at the House of Blues. We have rented the House of Blues in Dallas for our national conference. I don't care if you are from Wichita, Kansas, or you're from Jacksonville, Florida, or you're from Seattle. Come on down to Dallas and give yourself an opportunity to meet and network with some of the highest and best multifamily syndicators, educational providers, PPM, SEC attorneys. You know, these are the people that come and participate at our conference. And our keynote speaker this year is going to be Lou Holtz, Coach Lou Holtz. And our overriding theme is do the right thing. And Coach Lou Holtz will go into great detail on that. Michael?
Yeah, I think, again, we talked many times, this is a business you can't really do behind your desk at a home or your office. You got to get out and get networked. But as we kind of been talking about here recently, things are a little choppy right now, in the capital markets, spreads are widening and Fannie and Freddie are slowing up their production purposely. And, it seems like what we're talking about today, there's some bunch of rent control laws going on in Oregon and New York, and capital's kind of fleeing all around the country, and we're still strong believers in the fundamentals of Texas multifamily, and we're continuing to buy through the cycle, and we think that long term it's a great play. But our other conferences were great. But if any time, right now at this moment in time, I think if you guys could spend a few $100, come and get on an airplane, come to Texas, go to the conference, I think that money, hopefully you can get 100 times that money back in value. Whether you meet the right connection, whether you learn some sort of tip from the old guys panel, right? Kind of talking about all the mistakes that they made or didn't make in the 80s and how they survived it and what they're currently doing in real time to rework their business to deal with the current market changing conditions. Also listening to the listing brokers and what is happening in real time, and what's winning these deals, what's not winning these deals, what are some, real time, actual, practical, tactical things you could take away from it. I go to a lot of these other conferences and it's great. And, a lot of this stuff is, how do I get started in this business? How do I do this? How do I do that? But if you guys are serious about it, or you're in it, or you're either as a sponsor or a passive investor, or want to be a passive investor, you want to learn actual, tactical, practical things you can go out and apply, I think this is probably the best place for you guys to go.
It all has to do with problem solving. Come learn how to problem solve some of your life's challenges. If you want to get into multifamily, you want to learn from the best. It is a good conference to go to. So oldcapitalpodcast.com. Michael, who owns over 8,000 or has owned over 8,000 multifamily units, was a former banker for one of the largest banks in the United States. Took that, and now he manages over almost $700 million worth of assets under management, multifamily. Has purchased over $1 billion worth of multifamily property. It has $160 million worth of equity. He's gone from being a banker, the guy that would loan you the money, now to being an owner. So we really do appreciate him sharing some of his insights as an operator of multifamily properties to help you get your business to the next level. Again, we talked a little bit about problem solving. So we use this kind of this format, this platform to help you solve your problems. Let's talk about other people's problems. Michael, talk a little bit about what's going on in New York City and people having problems with some of these properties, assets up in New York City.
Yeah, so it's been one thing I've kind of learned through this process, that everything's very regionalized and localized as far as how multifamily is multifamily, but then it operates differently in New York as it does in the Southeast, as it was in California, the Pacific Northwest, or Texas, or wherever you're at. So you kind of get stuck in your own little world. From the way property taxes work to, up in, if you own a property in Chicago, where Paul was originally from, you got a budget in your operating budget, snow removal, but you don't have to do that down in Texas. And, you have different mechanical systems and the stuff in Texas. An old property in Texas was built in the 60s or 70s, and old property in New York was built in the, turn of the century, the 1800s. So, you could have properties that are, well over than, 100 years, and all the challenges that come with that. So one of the, I'm a podcast junkie. Not only do we co-host with Paul here this one, but I listen to a whole bunch of other ones. And actually, John Brickson turned me on to one called Behind the Bricks, which is a New York-based multifamily broker. And he's been talking about the recent enactment of the rent control laws, or the changing of the rent control laws up in New York, I guess probably about 2 months ago or so as we record this podcast. And all these things that other municipalities and other regions have to deal with. Like I know Oregon earlier this year passed a statewide rent control law. And I know in California, they were trying to last year pass statewide rent control, which then got shot down. So just kind of within the local municipalities. And, so what's happened in New York is, obviously that's a value appreciation play. It's not really like a yield or cash flow play because, people kind of see New York and Manhattan real estate is kind of like the Brinks truck of the world. To kind of store your value there. It's going to have perpetual demand because people always want to be in Manhattan and, you're 3 miles wide and whatever, 10, 15 miles long. And so you have a finite space and it's all developed out. So people, across the world put their money in New York, seeing that's a certain level of safety and security. And over the last many years, they've had our century or better, they've had rent control laws, and from what I understand, we don't know anything there, but from what I understand, they had the concept of if you had a rent controlled unit on vacancy, it would be deregulated, so meaning that you can come in and as a tenant moved out, you can reset the rents to a current market, and then once the tenant moves in, then you're restricted to 1% to 2% kind of increases as long as that tenant stays in there. But it would kind of be, basically you get 1% to 2% for 7 or 8 years, and every 8 years you can come in, reset it 20, 30%, and then kind of over a long period of time and kind of average out, where they just recently passed laws a couple months ago where now that there's no decontrol on vacancy. So no matter how much money you spend or whatever, you still just have a limited amount that you can come in and increase it. And these people have been paying these prices, these 3 caps on these deals, betting on that they can come, future upon vacancy, renovate it, increase the value and the income, and by extension the value. And that's now basically gone in these rent restricted units, which is like over 1 million, I believe, in New York. So it's really going to cause it's causing a lot of problems and a lot of panic up there. And, I think these people that, have had this as a business plan, they just lost, millions and millions of dollars off their value, if not, trillions in the marketplace, right, as a whole, because these people had a business plan. Now there's no prospects of raising it. So they're going to have to effectively, the market's going to have to just price it off current income. So, these cap rates are going to trade at 3. Someone's going to have like a 5% cap or 6% cap or something higher than what current are because they have no prospects of raising their rents in the future. So it's just going to wipe out a bunch of equity in these deals. And now the lenders are going to now be, probably over levered in a lot of these deals because they were loaning with this whole concept. And then the owners aren't going to have any actual cash flow or any incentive to reinvest into their buildings. So they can't raise the rents. And all of a sudden these buildings it's not going to happen overnight, but over the next decade, they're going to have, all this deferred maintenance that start accumulating, and then, taxes and payroll and insurance and everything keeps, going up and up, and they're just not going to have the ability to accumulate it. And then a lot of these people that they don't have the ability to go raise rents if a property comes vacant, it's going to take them $30,000 and just basic remediation for mold or, the electrical system or whatever to turn it over. And they can only charge $600 or something like that and rent because it's a rent controlled unit. They have no economic incentive, and they'll probably actually start pulling those units offline and not leasing them, just kind of keep them vacant, which will have, the exact opposite effect of what the law was intended to do, which is going to just restrict supply and make it even tougher for the low to mid-income people in New York to actually rent units. And then the buildings will fall in disrepair. And then people that have, good quality jobs and, can afford something, don't want to live in squalorly property. So they'll move over into Hoboken and New Jersey and Connecticut and wherever else to get the hell out of there. So it's going to be real interesting. But I say all that to kind of say that we're starting to see kind of some ripple effects where, being in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, but Texas-based company, a lot of the people we compete against, we got a lot of the money from the coast, but the coast usually is the left coast, the West Coast. So we got a lot of California money, and we're starting to see some international money. But here, the last couple of months, a lot of the people from New York buy down the Southeast, down to Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, et cetera. And we're starting to see more and more 212 area codes pop up, and people from New York are just fleeing because their home isn't safe anymore. It's pretty much just going to decimate that entire marketplace, and they're coming to all across the country trying to find a better place from home. So this capital is fleeing there, kind of places like Florida, Texas, Arizona, Utah, places like that to try to find a better place for capital preservation as well as upside and real returns. So it seems like the buyer pool is going to get even deeper, at least as this kind of works out. So I'm curious to see. I think a lot of these guys are going to beat their head against the wall for the first year or so as they come with their New York attitudes, trying to come to Texas and do business the way they do back at home. That's not going to be very well received from the couple brokers I've been talking to here lately. Some of the some of those guys up there are going to have a little rude awakening for a while, but they'll figure it out. They're all smart guys, so it's going to take a little while of losing and having no results, and ultimately they'll adapt to what the market conditions are and whatever the local region they're trying to play in. So it's been kind of an interesting thing. And then, so really what that means for places like Texas and Florida and Arizona and Georgia and places like that we don't have these rent control laws. It's just that more and more capital is going to be flooding. So there's going to be reallocated. The money that might be in New York is going to be reallocated and kind of be spread out across the country. So places like Texas should get their proportionate share of it, which would, kind of further the liquidity of our multifamily marketplace as well as the buyer pool. So hopefully that'll be supportive of pricing if you own a whole bunch of apartment units, and kind of hopefully help keep a floor in our marketplace a little bit higher than maybe it otherwise would have been.
What was funny is I was reading an article, because I read the New York Times and the New York Post living down here in Dallas. There was an article last week, a week before, talking about some guy that was taking his apartment building that he owned and dividing in half. He'd take a whole floor and have an upper level floor, a lower level floor, because he would almost put not bunk beds across, but he would put, instead of an 8 floor, he'd make it 4 feet floors. So he's putting double the amount of people into these units by just shrinking the size of their units. It's the most unbelievable thing. The New York City finally caught up with that guy. It's an aberration, but they fined him $100,000. But that's some of the thinking that's going to have to go on right now, is how people who have bought these buildings are thinking about how to cash flow these deals. Just, putting double the number of people into the same amount of space just to get cash flow.
Yeah, I think it's just a greater thing to think about when you're picking your markets that you guys are going into. If you're coming into different markets, as you're thinking you get priced out of Dallas and you want to go to Jacksonville, Florida, that's been a trade I've seen a lot of people here locally do. Make sure that you understand the local regional differences between Florida and Texas, or, New York and Texas, or California and Utah, or whatever it is, because every place is a little bit different, and you have these different level of governmental and regulatory risks that maybe you're not fully appreciating or baking into your pricing that, just because it's the way it is today means it's not going to be the same way it's going to be in the future. The only thing you can guarantee in this business is it's going to change, whether it's the capital markets or the government regulations, or, supply comes in, or whatever it is always changing. So making sure that you guys are being up to speed with the current market conditions, constantly in the marketplace, constantly talking to brokers, owners, management companies, lenders, etc. I think if you do that, you can kind of see this stuff coming and maybe try to get the hell ahead of it or out of its way, one of the two.
Time is money on some of these transactions. And so talk with the right experts in the area, because sometimes, people in Northern California, or people that want to invest in Northern California, will see a property about $175,000 a unit. Well, the marketplace is maybe $225,000. In Dallas, people will see a deal it's selling at $70,000 a door in a $100,000 market. Somebody in Omaha may be looking at a deal at $35,000 a door at $60,000 typical market price of multifamily properties. I go with the prudent man theory. If that property cost or price is a lot lower than what the marketplace is, then there may be something functionally wrong with the property. You can't all say, well, it's a value-added property. I always go with the prudent man theory. I got a call this week from a gentleman out of California looking to buy a property here in Texas, is wanting to know why the price in this property was so much lower than the rest of them. And I told him, I said, it's not in a good area. And that would be a challenge for you as being an outsider coming into this marketplace in your first transaction, to do really well in an area that's not going to be very good right from the beginning. So again, prudent man theory is that if somebody in the Dallas-Fort Worth marketplace was wanting to buy this property, they would have bought the property. So they open it up to people that don't know the marketplace. Michael Becker's rule number 1 is don't buy in the hood. When you go to these areas where you think that it could be a steal to buy it, talk with other experts in the area, find out if it is a good area that you should be putting money or time into explore multifamily properties in these hoodish like areas. Anything more?
No, it's like I said, I've been crying wolf for 3 to 4 years, and the market's been proving me wrong. But at some point, these high crime areas are going to kind of revert back to the mean, and I think a lot of people are going to realize how liquidity can come in and out of these marketplaces pretty damn quick. So when the liquidity dries up, the first place it's going to dry up is in these challenging, tough markets. So you might not be able to get out of Woodhaven or Oak Cliff or Lake Highlands or Victory Meadows or Las Vegas Trail or all these little locations that I've been saying saying you shouldn't buy. You've been doubling your money in 2-3 years.
Those are challenging areas in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, but every large metropolitan area has those challenging markets. Talk with the experts in the area. That maybe that somebody's not affiliated with that property to give you truthful advice.
Yeah, because when there's blood in the water, people go to quality first, and those are the properties that maintain liquidity, and the tough areas just lose all liquidity, and you're just stuck there. So if you buy it, you better think you want to own it for a while, because you can't just bet on the I'm going to buy it, renovate it, sell it 2 years later, and the next guy's going to do the 2.0 and then 3.0 and then the 4.0 value add. Because at some point, some guy's going to own it, and then he's going to have to operate this older property in a tough location and have all the ongoing capital items that occur all the time with these tougher properties that are in tough locations that are a little bit older physically.
Absolutely. If somebody wanted to learn a little bit more about you guys, the SPI group, and your syndication business, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, just our company's SPI Advisory. So just go to our website, which is www.spiadvisory.com. That's SPI like spy. Advisory.com. There's a contact us form, and I'm always happy to have a 10 to 15 minute telephone call with listeners off of the podcast. And also, again, I'll kind of beat the drum. I know Paul talks about it, but I don't think he sells it as much as he should. I think the value that you guys will get by spending a few $100 coming into to Dallas and going to a little capital conference, I mean, I would argue it's probably 100x on your money. I don't think we're charging anywhere near what the actual true value is of this conference, from both the relationships you can get and hopefully some nuggets and some wisdom that are really practical, tactical, and actionable. It's not just theory and you need to buy real estate because you can depreciate and save on taxes. I mean, I think you can get that by reading a book, but to get actual real life seasoned people that own tens and tens of thousands of units on one panel talk about how they navigated it in the previous recessions and what they're doing in real life right now, I think that is something I certainly would not want to miss.
Great information. Thanks, Michael. I'm Paul Peebles. That was Michael Becker. Have a great day.